ये वाली जो सेशन है पहले सेशन के बाद ये सेशन हम लोग प्लेसेस एंड सर्विसेज के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। इस सेशन पे जो संस्थाएं हैं जो सर्विस देती है इनफॉर्मल सेटलमेंट्स को, that is the kind of institutions we're talking about. So very pleased today to have with us the CEO of the Delhi Jal Board, Mr. Yadav, and with him will be Amita Bhide, who is at the school Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, and Dr. Nilima Risbud, who is at the was at the School of Planning here, and therefore is somebody who's very well known to the Delhi urban fraternity. The session will begin with a presentation about the findings from the project, which focus on these places and services, which will be done by my colleagues who worked on this project, at Shahana Sheikh and Subhadra Banda. And then a discussion on those findings, beginning with Mr. Yadav and then Mr. Risbud and Dr. Bhide. And Dr. Bhide would sort of coordinate the proceedings going forward. So if I can please request Nilima and Dr. Bhide and Mr. Yadav and Patrick, my co-director for the project, to join the dais, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Heller. As Partho mentioned, I'm the co-director of the Cities of Delhi project. I'm a professor of sociology at Brown University. And I just want to begin by publicly acknowledging my gratitude to CPR for having given me this opportunity to be part of this team. It's been an extraordinary project. Yesterday, Partho inadvertently said we've been working on this for 10 years, which isn't quite right. It's only been 2 years, but sometimes it feels like it's been 10 years. It's been a tremendous amount of work. And one of the things I hope to do in my short presentation is to convince you that you shouldn't be satisfied with any of these presentations, but you should rather take the time to go to the website and read the reports, because as they say, the devil's in the details. And we've done a tremendous amount of work. It's an extraordinary team. It's been exhilarating for me, and I just want to publicly acknowledge the work that Subhadra and Shahana and Ben and Ram and Bijendra and Sonal have done, and there have been others, and then the collaboration with Partho and the inspired leadership of Pratap Mehta, putting this event together, putting together the various interfaces that we now have, this extraordinary web page where you'll see that we not only have the reports, but these wonderful graphics, and there'll be eventually pictures, and we even have some ideas of doing some later on GIS work and maybe adding videos. But we want this to be as much of a resource as possible. And I want to emphasize that the reports in particular, the overview report is an effort to bring it all together, and it's a bit complicated, and that's what we'll be presenting today. But the individual reports were written as best we can, and it's very difficult for academics to actually write in a way that's accessible, because we're trained to be complicated and obfuscate, etc. It's sort of how you get promoted in academia, as being unnecessarily complicated. So we had to work very hard to make these reports accessible, and we had a lot of help. And we also translated all of them, or most of them, and hope to translate all of them into Hindi with Sonal's help. So these are very accessible reports. There's not much theory in them. You won't hear anything about governmentality or the neoliberal city or Foucault or Chatterjee. It's about how do people get water, how do people get access to sanitation, how do people get access to services in the colonies, the settlements of Delhi. And the idea was really to provide as rich, as granular, as textured, as contextual a picture as possible of the daily lives of people who live in what we call the excluded colonies. So let me, I have about 15 minutes, And my goal is to give you a quick overview of the project. And I would ask that, I hope most of you have the report in hand, because these tables will be impossible to read on the screen, but I believe this one is on page 5. And this is, for me, the document that tells you much of what you need to know about the nature of inclusion, or the lack thereof, as it were, in the city of Delhi today. This, to me, is a quite extraordinary document that we stumbled on very early in our work. It's been reproduced in countless government reports. It's been reproduced in countless academic accounts. Many people in this room are intimately familiar with this table. We've added a little to it from the work of Gautam Ban and Maria. And this is the official classification system for Delhi. This is what we call in the report the official differentiation of citizenship of Delhi, right? Delhi is a city that's divided into 8 legally defined and differentiated settlement categories. You've heard this number a number of times from speakers over the past 2 days. Only 25% of the city actually lives in planned colonies. And yesterday there was a discussion about what's middle class, what's other classes. I think it's safe to say that 25% of the city is bourgeois. 25% of the city enjoys full rights of citizenship in the way Partha Chatterjee, among others, has interpreted the idea of citizenship. For the rest of the city, their relationship to the city and to its most basic services, in particular water and sanitation, which is what we'll focus on today, is negotiated. It's not a right. It's not something you get in a routinized, predictable manner. It's something that you have to struggle for. It's something that you have to negotiate. So in these 8 categories, I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to emphasize the 3 that we focused on, the 3 that we term collectively excluded colonies. They're excluded because, in principle, they have no legal right to basic services, and these are JJCs, unauthorized colonies, and resettlement colonies. I think it's worth pointing out that slum-designated areas are entitled to services, but oftentimes don't get them. But we're only focusing on the 3 that don't get them. And I want to begin by saying that this all looks very official and empirical, but if you look closely at this table, the numbers are clearly partly fictions. I'm not a statistician, but I do know that the probability that 2 of these colonies, 2 pairs of these colonies, so if you look at this table, and if you can't read it here, you can read it in the report, 2 of them have identical numbers. So unauthorized colonies at 0.874 lakhs, and rural villages at 0.874 lakhs. I mean, the idea that they would have identical numbers statistically is improbable. And then if you look at what's the other doubled up category, regularized unauthorized colonies, which in and of itself is an extraordinary oxymoron of the bureaucratic language of classification, and resettlement colonies, both at 2.099 lakh. So these numbers are a little fishy. We have members or residents of Sangham Vihar here. When you go to Sangham Vihar, everyone says there's about 8 lakh, maybe 1 million people in Sangham Vihar. Sangham Vihar alone is bigger than the number reported here for unauthorized colonies. So these numbers are problematic, but this is a grid of classification. This is a system by which services are differentiated across settlement types. So what we did in this project, so we have this big picture. We have concerns about some of the existing data, census data and NSS and survey data. We think there's definitional problems, there's reporting problems, but even if we have a general sense of the distribution of services, we don't have a very good sense of what that actually looks like on the ground. So the idea of the project was to spend time in a selected number of settlements. So we picked 6 JJCs, 3 resettlement colonies, and 1 very large unauthorized colony, Sangham Vihar, which itself is technically a number of unauthorized colonies. And we visited these colonies many times. We did focus groups. We interviewed key persons. We interviewed ordinary persons. We spoke to government officials responsible to those areas. Wherever possible, we interviewed the MLA. We did a lot of background looking at government documents, legal documents, etc. And as best we could, we tried to document the actual state of services on the ground in these different communities. And of course, what we found is that there's tremendous variation across categories, which isn't surprising given the grid of classification, but also within categories. So across JJCs, there's a tremendous amount of variation. We found some JJCs that are actually fairly well provisioned. I mean, they have more or less reliable access to water, and they have CTCs that work relatively well. And we found other JJCs that have no sanitation options and have very acute problems in terms of accessing drinkable water. And Subhadra will say more about those findings in a moment. But I just want to highlight this table, which is on page 15 and 16 of the document. This really summarizes the actual concrete findings of the project, which in some ways are very mundane findings, but again, the devil's in the detail, and I think it's important to have this granular understanding of the nature of service delivery on the ground. I'm going to highlight the big findings, then Subhadra, and later this afternoon, Shahana will talk more specifically about settlements and processes and institutions. I want to make 6 big points here and add one in light of the minister's comments this morning. The first point I want to make is the point about the city as a form of rationed space. And Professor Kunduz made a comment yesterday to the effect that it might be possible that inequality in Delhi is falling, in part because the city is becoming more exclusionary. And that makes the larger point that the city is a space of opportunity. Professor Samadar yesterday mentioned the work of Chuck Tilley, a famous sociologist, wrote a book called Durable Inequality. And in that book, he has this concept of opportunity hoarding. That one of the things elites do, they exploit, in the traditional Marxist sense of the term, but in the Weberian sense, they also hoard opportunities. And what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things, but one of the things it means is that they hoard space. And the city is a space of opportunity. And if you're an elite, whatever fraction of the elite you might be, one of the stakes you might have in the city is hoarding that space. And I would argue that the history of planning in Delhi, as is true in many other cities in the world, but I think it's especially pronounced in Delhi, has been a process of rationing space. That the master plans of Delhi, that the planning processes of the city of Delhi have always undersupplied land and undersupplied housing, and then created this phenomenon of so-called unauthorized colonies, which, as people have pointed out, should be really called unrecognized colonies. In the process of doing so, they, through this grid of service delivery, have differentiated citizenship. So depending on where you live, you have different rights of citizenship. Arjuna Padarai once described the poor of Bombay as citizens without a city. Yeah, they are citizens constitutionally as nationals of the Indian nation. They are entitled to certain rights, but within the city, those rights are highly differentiated. And that plays out very dramatically in terms of access to basic services. And we think this is important because if in a Senyan sense you think of development as having basic capabilities, it strikes us that there's no more basic capabilities than having a place to go to the bathroom and having clean water to drink. Neighborhood effects. I want to highlight this because there was a bit of a debate yesterday. Should we be looking at labor or migration or place? And I think these are all important topics. One of the reasons we wanted to focus on settlements is because we've learned from the broader sociological literature that place really does matter. And I just want to highlight this point by referencing the existing literature, which isn't as well developed in India, but is very well developed in the US and Brazil and South Africa and other places I've worked. Sociologists are increasingly finding, using very, very good empirical data, that even if you control for all the standard socioeconomic factors, your parents' income, education levels, race, ethnicity, community, even when you control for all those things, where you live has a huge effect on your life chances. Raj Chetty, famously in the United States, has recently published a study which shows that the income you earn as an adult is in large part determined by where you grew up. Neighborhoods really matter, right? So we want to study neighborhood effects, and the way the city of Delhi is partitioned into this grid-like differentiated system of citizenship, one would imagine that neighborhoods are very strong. Neighborhood effects might be very strong, and it turns out we're right. We know this from our qualitative research, but we also know it from some of the quantitative research that CPR has done and that Parto presented yesterday, where and I was actually quite stunned at this finding. The segregation by caste in Delhi is not nearly as pronounced as the segregation by service level. Right? So think about that. I mean, caste still matters, obviously, class still matters, but it turns out space matters even more in terms of determining what level of service delivery you get. The point that's not on this slide that I wanted to add comes directly from the comments that the minister just made, and this is I would say, our biggest non-finding. Our biggest non-finding is that the state is absent in these colonies. Now, if you add all these colonies up, JJCs, resettlement colonies, and unauthorized colonies, that's arguably 50% of the city. It's 2,000 colonies, roughly, and we never found the state. The state is just not present. The MLAs show up at election time once in a while. One of the agencies might show up to collect some fees, a euphemism for other things. But in terms of a day-to-day presence, in terms of offices, in terms of the ordinary citizen in these colonies being able to transact with the state is absent. The institutional surface area of the state in India and in Delhi is very, very, very thin. Right? When citizens want to transact with the state, they usually don't transact with the state. They transact with intermediaries, pradhans, bosses, maybe politicians. And that in and of itself is a huge problem. And I mention this because I think one of the big initiatives of the current government is, in effect, to bring the state back into these communities to make officers of the different agencies directly accountable to communities. And that strikes me in institutional terms as extraordinarily important. Related to that point, insofar as citizens can't directly transact with the state because they don't have rights, they don't have a right to demand water, they don't have a right to demand sanitation in these colonies, they end up having to negotiate their relationships with the state. And so what you get, in effect, are 2,000 political settlements. Across every one of these colonies, the actual political arrangements through which people get access to basic services is a local political settlement. It has to do with patronage, clientelism, how strong the community is, whether or not the MLA is from the dominant party, whether or not the MLA is good at representing the community, whether or not maybe some of the municipal councillors, has to do whether the community is divided or not. Every one of them is a different kind of political settlement. So from a purely institutional point of view, this is incredibly inefficient. All right? Rather than having one set of relationships to the service delivery state, you have 2,000 different political settlements. And this creates a range of complicated outcomes, which we describe in the different reports. There's instances of extreme vulnerability, communities that have no leverage whatsoever. At the other end, there's well-organized communities like Sangam Vihar, which has a very strong and a long tradition of RWAs, but has nowhere to go because government hasn't been interacting with these institutions. And then you have a lot of middling cases of various kinds of classic patronage regimes. Consequences. And then this is my last slide, and then we'll get into the granular details of service delivery. Just a big takeaway for me, and this is not specific to Delhi, this is true in many cities, but place does determine basic capabilities. And it's very clear that having access to water and sanitation has all sorts of important spillover effects for other capabilities. It's difficult to educate yourself when you're spending, especially girls who have to wait all day for the tanker trucks to arrive because they don't arrive on a regular schedule, and so they don't go to school, right? So there's all these very negative knock-on consequences. Or women who get harassed because they have to use CTCs that don't have lights or proper guards, or the doors don't close. Again, enormous social consequences. So place really does determine capabilities, which in turn determine opportunity structures, right? And the most obvious one here in a spatial sense is distance from work, right? So the new resettlement colonies that have been created, as Partho mentioned yesterday, these are planned settlements that become slums and that are on the periphery of the city, that remove people from their work and increase their costs of transacting with the local economy, and hence increase or minimize, reduce their opportunity structures. This failure of public provisioning, that is the failure to provide water and sanitation as public goods as a function of basic rights of citizenship, has three very perverse consequences. One, and I think this requires a little explanation because it's quite important, in the absence of effective state delivery or public delivery of these services, people improvise, right? They negotiate, they improvise, and it's incredibly innovative, and some economists would celebrate these as market solutions, right? But a lot of these market solutions are really suboptimal. Right, this is a very low-level equilibrium. And I'll just give you one example. In Sangam Vihar, there are streets, there are blocks where there's not one set of pipes, but 3 sets of pipes, right? Because you have different bore wells controlled by different operators, connected to different politicians, and they all have their own pipe systems, and it creates problems with pressure and access, et cetera. And as someone said yesterday, it creates a lot of conflict in the community, right? So these are very suboptimal innovative solutions to the failure of public service delivery. There's a huge financial premium on the poor. Some of the numbers that people reported to us on what they spend for water. Now, if you live in a planned colony, and I've lived in a planned colony in Delhi, you barely pay attention to your water bill. You know, it comes once a month, and given the levels you consume, it's actually not that bad. If you live in one of these settlements, you're constantly having to pay sometimes for tanker truck water, which is supposed to be delivered free of cost, buy water through kiosks, buy water on the market. The poor pay a huge premium. Right? They're paying more for services, which is precisely why they want to be regularized. They're happy to pay taxes to get regular services. Thirdly, the social costs are enormous. There are social costs in dignity, right? I mean, the indignities of not having a place to go to the bathroom, the indignity of spending your day collecting water, the indignity of being constantly in conflict with your neighbors or other members of the community over who stands first in line to get water from the tanker truck. And we've all seen the panic, the near panic that sometimes emerges when water trucks arrive in communities. So there are these huge knock-on effects, and obviously they reverberate with caste and gender and other existing social exclusions. So the final point is that if we really want to think about constructive ways in which to address these problems, we really need a detailed, granular, contextual understanding of service delivery, of the politics of service delivery, of the institutional mechanisms on the ground, which is why we've produced these reports. We're now going to hear a little bit more about our findings with respect to service delivery in these communities. So, Badra.
Patrick said the devil lies in the details, so I guess I'm the devil today. To start with, these are the big findings of our analysis on places and services in these places. About half this city arguably has no reliable access to water or piped water or piped sewerage in toilets. To start with, we look at sanitation under 3 prongs: 1, sewerage; 2, toilets; and 3, solid waste management. The big finding in sewerage is this. There is no piped sewerage, and it's rare even in resettlement colonies. And the reason we highlight resettlement colonies is that, as Dr. Partho highlighted yesterday and even today morning, this is the attempt of the state to bring the informal within the planned. And this has resulted in a situation where the MPD guaranteed services 2 years after resettlement, and 10 years later, we still don't have pipe sewerage in these areas, resulting in a situation that Usha Ramanathan titles a planned slum. We also, where there are indoor toilets, we have a situation where the human waste drains into septic tanks with little septage, meaning cesspits, and then this human waste is collected by exhauster trucks or bowsers, also a private service. And it is also true that raw sewage is common in these areas. When we visited Savdagera, areas reserved for a playground were seen filled with raw sewage. As a result, the main form of toilet provisioning within these areas are CTCs, that is the public provisioning. And even there, this public provisioning is inefficient. I take the example of Indra Kalyan Vihar, a JJC to which 1,20,000 people are residents. And even in that area, after 3 rounds of CTC construction, 1 in 1998 and 2 in 2002, till August 2014, only 3 toilet seats were functional, meaning the ratio in that settlement was 1:40,000, very, very far from ratios highlighted in most policy documents. And therefore, the forms that private provisioning take in these settlements are one, tarpaulin enclosures for open defecation. We found one JJC with situation where there were flying toilets. And lastly, solid waste management, we have the MCD present where there is a collection from the Dhalaus, but there's also some settlements where we noticed a very organized solid waste management system that was privately organized. Water is easily the most negotiated and political service. As Dr. Bhide pointed out yesterday, each one of these bowels is a point of conflict. We first start with describing one main form of provisioning, which are the water tanker services. And tankers, as per the DJP statute, are makeshift services, but these are the main form of provisioning in these settlements. And it ranges from a very well-organized, regulated, timely delivery in settlements like Kusumpur Pahari, and the more irregular delivery in settlements like F Block, Punjabi Basti. And going back to the point about bowels, the number of bowels regulated in the city, according to reports, are 4,196, and about 400,000 unregulated bowels, which means that we have 400,000 points of conflict in this city. So from whichever document we want to draw goals from, the MDG, the SDG, or whatever other international commitment India has signed up to, Delhi is far from achieving it in water and sanitation. Thank you.
What I'm going to do is to ask, can we go straight to the panel presentations पे जा सकते हैं? And then we can have a discussion across the board. Partha, is that okay as a format? Yeah? Okay. I'm wearing like a double hat in this panel, so I hope all of you are able to moderate my timing. But Subhadra, can you? Don't let me go more than 10 minutes. What I will talk about is really try to see some of these findings and locate some of these findings of the Cities of Delhi project and pose my own reflections on it, coming from two actually perches. One is the experience of Mumbai and several other cities in India. The second also comes from my observations of informal settlements in Rio and in Durban. So one, in relation to Mumbai, I think there are several parallels, and I think also in relation to several cities in India, one can see that there is an overall inequity. I think that is more than evident, and that there is a preponderance of Dalits. In several other cases, we also have a preponderance of Muslims that one would see in several of these informal settlements. And I think the overall finding which is there of reproduction of inequity by the state is also something that one can find echoed in several of our cities. And I think that's something that should be like a baseline, really. But on the other hand, there are several differences. And I want to point out two things. Such granular work, perhaps there is a lot of rich material which is available in several cities of the country. I think it is strange that actually about Delhi, there is much less work which is there. In spite of, I think, the availability of funds, Delhi as the resource capital in the country, and yet one finds very little of this kind of granular work about informal settlements which are being done in Delhi. So this is something that one needs to observe. The other special thing really about Delhi that I find is that Delhi is perhaps one of the very few cities in the country where the state resources have been put in a tremendous amount. So when Patrick talks about the rationing of space, I think that rationing of space is coming directly from the state, and which is, I think, makes it an extremely stark kind of reality. On the other hand, in Mumbai and several other cities of the country, the role of the state has actually been, I wouldn't say minimal, but If you look at planning, the overall control on land, the state control is really something which is also negotiated. So there is almost like a constant interplay of different scales of private players with the state, and the speciality of the city is produced thereof. So the product of us that we see in city space is really like an interplay between the private sector and the state. But when I'm saying private sector, also at multiple scales. A city like Mumbai, therefore, has a very, very tight spatiality, and a tight spatiality when even perhaps some of the most richest settlements and neighborhoods, like if you talk of Malabar Hill, if you look at Pedder Road, if you look at Juhu, all of these also have to contend with the presence of slums within their midst. Not just that, but the sheer force of politics has ensured that in situ upgradation today is no longer a negotiated right, but it is almost like a de facto principle that has been established in the city, not now, but since the 1980s. Okay? And where relocations have been done, where resettlements have been done, the negotiations over the resettlement policy have been huge. Okay? I think that's one dimension which really distinguishes perhaps Delhi from Mumbai. The distance of relocation colonies, again, in Delhi, again, to me, reveals really the power that the state has, the distance at which you are able to throw the poor out of the city, okay, and keep them out and really, in some ways, break all their socio-spatial fabrics. So I think this is something which is critical. But what is very interesting in the Mumbai case, and which has, I think, been referred to in this conference several times, is the entire Mumbai model which is being talked about, and the need to bring in this market where the state finds itself very limited in bringing about any relocation exercises in terms of removing slums. So therefore, it brings in the market. These kind of experiments in the city of Mumbai have happened since the 1990s. And what they have really created is, if it has not created urban peripheries which are full of resettlement colonies, then it has created wards towards the edge, huge administrative wards where there is a concentration of poverty. My institution, TISS, is located in one of these kind of wards, which is called the M East ward. It's an administrative ward of over 8 lakh population, 77% of which stays in resettlement colonies and in differing informal settlements of varying tenures, I would say. Some which undergo evictions as many as 10 to 15 times a year, and others which are more secure, and so on and so forth. So I think if one is trying to look at these and these parallels to me in Mumbai, I think are very important, because to me these are like two ends that one is able to see in India. Delhi, where the power of the state is really, really high, potentially. Right? So much land which has been acquired, so much resources which have been invested into the national capital region, and the state therefore producing inequality. And what society produces collectively is what is being seen, I think, in several other cities of the country. So one needs to see these two as really the contrasting pictures. Within these now, if you start looking at the institutional possibilities, and I thought this research really brings in 3 different scales. So it is looking at places, and it is also looking at institutions and processes. I'm going to follow that same format and also dwell a little bit about the institutions and the processes. One of the institutions which I find it very remarkable, which has not been covered, is in terms of looking at the municipal corporation. And one knows that in Delhi there are 2 municipal corporations. So you have the MCD and you also have the NDMC. 5 now. Okay. So I need to correct my data. So what is this body called the Municipal Corporation, to whom the 74th Amendment entrusts 2 different things? One, planning of the city is entrusted, hopefully, by the 74th Constitutional Amendment to the Municipal Corporation. The municipal corporation is also interested with poverty alleviation, social and economic development, and with welfare of weaker sections. Okay? And I think it is very important to therefore understand how has these local governments actually responded to these kind of realities. How has their politics, which is the most proximate politics, responded to the needs of the citizens who are underprivileged. And at least our findings in several of these processes are very interesting, because if one looks at the content of the municipal law only deals with all underprivileged citizens only under one term called encroachment. Okay? So we've been doing studies and linked to, one finds that all practices which are linked to informal settlements are then evolved through different arbitrary value mechanisms, okay, which incorporate personal values, and there are institutional practices. So this is like a dynamic interplay that one sees, because the entire business of a municipal corporation has actually now become much more than middle class citizens and upper class citizens. You see it being populated by demands which are coming from the underprivileged sections, and it is not capable of actually redressing any of these demands. So this is one institution which I hope can be studied. Is this an institution of potentiality, as opposed to the Delhi Jal Board or the DUSIB or DDA, which happen to be parastatals, where there is no democracy which actually operates? Okay? So that's one question. In terms of process, there has been a lot of focus in the study which is around elections, which is a political event. And I wonder whether one could also shift to dimensions which are linked to the agency and the voice of people in the settlements. Thinking about what are the possibilities of organization there, and how do they deal with services and the provision of services. And from this point of view, there is one important question that I want to raise. One talks of intermediaries, and the presence of intermediaries becomes a problem, as is framed in the study, because it is a block in the relationship between the state and the citizen. Okay? I would like to propose at least some hypothesis for consideration. The state does not want to read, the state doesn't have information. The slum, the informal settlement, the unauthorized colony, the regularized unauthorized colony, all of these are illegible to the state. But on the other hand, these illegibilities are also the very defense of several of these informal settlements, which have allowed them to hold on to the kind of claims that they are making of the city. So how does one locate this presence of intermediaries and these kind of self-organization processes? I will just make one final point and conclude. And this is basically based on observations in Rio and in Durban, where I see that the informal settlement in these cities is so illegible, and it has been so marginalized in specific cultural ways that it becomes a site of violence, that it is somewhere separated out. Even while being in the city or on the periphery, it is separated out from the socio-spatial fabric of the city. I think in India, we have a huge strength that all of our informal settlements are so open, and therefore they are being researched so actively, right? Anyone can go walk, interact with people, everything. And I think in some ways that is a strength of the overall socio-spatial fabric that our cities have. Do we see this as a strength? Do we want to retain it? Or do we want to make our informal settlements reach that position of conflict where they kind of become coiled within themselves into an illegible space? I'll stop here. Thank you. Mr. Yadav.
Hello everyone. I'm feeling as if I'm lost in this ocean of academic brilliance. So everybody seems to be academician here, and with a lot of jargons and other stuff which I am not very used to in my day-to-day functioning. So I'll be very straightforward, and I won't use all those jargons because I don't have those in my armory. So I think this is a very good report from the perspective of Delhi Jal Board and from the perspective of Delhi government, and very enlightening one also. And somewhere I could see the reflections of ground reality in the report. And I would make one observation is that it is slightly dated report, that I think the study or the field work was done about 2 years back. And so a lot of work has been done thereafter. Probably it was the findings, most of the findings are true, except a few which I would like to contest, but it's not something where it's only putting forth my point. So one is that as far as water is concerned, Delhi Jal Board or Delhi government has done a lot of work in last 2-3 years. So the main water deficient colonies or settlements which you say are the JJ clusters and that colonies, unauthorized colonies. So unauthorized colonies, out of 1600, we have covered 1300 with piped water supply, and most of the work done in last 2 years as well. And somewhere it's written in the report that there is nothing which prevents Jal Board from extending piped water supply to any settlement. No, it's not true. Because unauthorized colonies, we can't work without an NOC for taking up development works from the Delhi government. All the unauthorized colonies, they are on different unauthorized colonies are on different land. So sometimes they don't have the title to that land, or even they have been, for development purposes at least, there are at least 3 types of colonies where we can't take up development works. One, the colonies which are on the forest land. So we can't lay a single pipeline in the forest land. So that is preventing us from taking water, which is life, I will say. So we can't lay a supply network in colonies on the forest land. We can't lay pipe network in colonies which are around the protected monuments, within the prohibited and regulated areas of various protected monuments. So that is another thing. Third, which are in the hindrances of the various facilities proposed in the master plan. Like if a master plan road is proposed in the DDA's master plan, and if a settlement is right on it, so we are not allowed to take up the work there. So despite that, with our best efforts, we could convince the government to give us NOC in most of the colonies, except still there are 122 which are left, which fall into either of these categories. And the aim of Delhi Jal Board is to cover all these colonies before the summer of 2018. So we have laid down a very clear roadmap. We have already covered, as I would say, 1043 colonies have already been covered with piped water supply, and the remaining ones, 200 per year, our plan is to cover all of them before the summer of 2018. So that's one. Second, fortunately, the availability of water to Delhi has increased, and 2 of our water treatment plants, which were lying dysfunctional since last 10 years, they have been operationalized recently, within this year. One is Dwarka, which is 50 mgd capacity. 50 mgd would be about 250 million liters. And another is Bhavana. So that is a very good development for Delhi. As far as the JJ clusters are concerned, the second most important category, which is generally deprived. So Jal Board provides water through the public hydrants and water tankers. So here also the aim is to at least take public hydrants to each of the JJ clusters by 2018 in a phased manner, so that the problem of contamination, problem of scheduled supply, tanker not coming as per schedule, etc., they can be overcome. Then about the water tankers, it's really interesting how entire thing works. But We have tried, the Jal Board has tried that there is transparency in distribution of water through the water tankers. So we have two types of water tankers. One are the SS, that is stainless steel tankers, other are the MS tankers, that is the mild steel or whatever you call. So SS tankers, we have 414 which are functioning now. All of them are fitted with GPS device, all of them are fitted with water sensors, and they are operated under one system through Delhi Integrated Multimodal Transport Limited, DIMTS. So the issue of water mafia, issue of misuse of those tankers has been tackled to quite an extent. Our officers, we have a very good web-based system, so our officers also monitor when the tanker is going, and the system itself monitors whether the tanker reached the site on time, it reached the predetermined site or not. And if it doesn't reach, it is system makes it as missed trip and we don't pay for it. So by regulating the missed trip, we regulate, because the missed trips are regulated by the system, by the GPS system, by the water sensor. If the tanker is not going to the scheduled place, it's a missed trip. Tanker is not reporting at the scheduled time, it's a missed trip. Tanker is not carrying water, it's a missed trip. So the regulation is there, but there are other 400 odd tankers which are MS tankers which are not regulated by GPS. So there is misutilization of those tankers, and slowly we are phasing them out, and I hope, my vision is to make Delhi water tanker free in next 3 years. So if there is no demand, no need for sending a water tanker, then all this tanker mafia and other things will automatically go away. But if we can't achieve that vision, at least we will have all the tankers which are stainless steel tankers with GPS, water sensors and other things. But what are our challenges? Challenge is not to take the water supply or sanitation service. Challenge is unplanned development of Delhi. I started working in Delhi government in 2002. At that time, I used to hear that there are 800 unauthorized colonies. Now, officially, there are 1600 unauthorized colonies. So, habitations go first and then the services go. So, we are always chasing. So, now, even if I take water to 1600 unauthorized colonies, I am sure by 2018, there will be at least 300-400 more unauthorized colonies, where again our chase will start. So that is the challenge, and I would not go into that why it is happening. There are multiple agencies, planning agencies different, land regulation is different. So Delhi's administration is very, very complex. It is not like Mumbai or any other city which is controlled by the state. It is controlled by the center, by the state, by the local corporations, and it is that way. It's not a very happy situation. So, but from the Delhi government side, there is a 70-point agenda of the new government, and at least 20 points in that 70 point relate to water and sanitation. So the focus of the government is very clear on water, and the 70-point agenda also talks about making water as a right, and we are also working towards that. And another, I would say, indication of the commitment, especially to the people of Sangam Vihar, of the government, is that the vice chairman of DDA, who has been recently appointed, is an MLA from Sangam Vihar. So Sangam Vihar would definitely be a focus area to take water to. And we have already, if there are representatives from Sangam Vihar, we have already framed estimates, and I hope that work for laying water pipelines to Sangam Vihar will start within next 2-3 months. And I hope to take piped water to many areas of Sangam Vihar before the next summer. And sewerage, I would say we are lagging behind in the sewerage services, where in water we have covered almost 2/3 of the unauthorized colonies, and we plan to cover the rest in next 3 years. Sewerage services will definitely take some more time. So that's all for now. Thank you.
कल हमें पार्थो जी ने बताया था कि हर पैनल जो है आज का, उसमें 3-4 अलग अलग तरह के लोग होंगे. एक तो कि ये प्रोजेक्ट में क्या हुआ है उसका प्रेजेंटेशन होगा. दूसरा कि there would be a academic who is responding, there is a official who is responding, there is somebody from a political wing, and there is somebody who is a practitioner. Okay, unfortunately, I think our panel happens to be one where some of these elements have given us a ditch. So we also have I would say a fellow academic as well as a practitioner, Dr. Nilima Risput. I would ask her to share her reflections.
थैंक यू अमिता। आज सुबह से जो बातें हो रही हैं उसमें आज जो बहुत अच्छी बात लगी मुझे, आज जो हमारे डिप्टी चीफ मिनिस्टर ने कहा कि एक्शन ओरिएंटेड रिसर्च हो, क्योंकि तब तक पॉलिटिशियंस को इंटरेस्ट नहीं आता ना एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को इंटरेस्ट आता है। तो एक अच्छा संकेत था कि कम से कम कोई तो सोच रहा है कि रिसर्च का इस्तेमाल भी किया जाए। तो ये एक बहुत अच्छी बात हुई, पर अब देखते हैं कि ये एक्शन में कितना आता है। कुछ बातें जो थी, अलाउ मी टू प्रेजेंट इन अ मिक्स्ड लैंग्वेज so that everybody takes advantage of what is actually happening on the ground. I have no solutions, but I'll raise some issues. One of the issue which I would like to raise is that since the topic is transformation, this transformation is not constant. It is happening. It's a dynamic situation. Today we saw some of the profiles of informal settlements. About 20, 30 years ago, we also had some profiles of informal settlements, and today we see that they have completely changed. It's not the same. So each and every settlement is undergoing constant change. So change has become very constant. So how do you provide for a very dynamic settlement, whether it was Sangam Vihar or take any resettlement colony also. It was studied in 74, where it was a plotted development with people with juggis. Now you see 4-storied settlement. The density has increased, people have changed, incomes have changed, their locational attributes have changed, property prices have changed. And so therefore the demand for services has also changed. Their strength has also changed. So therefore, I think we are dealing with a system, 75% of Delhi, which is growing unregulated manner. I am in no favor of a regulation, but which is growing just left to the market forces and the demand and whatever. So it's not only need-based, it's also market which is operating in all these settlements. So therefore, how do you provide services for uncontrolled densification, uncontrolled growth, uncontrolled habitation, and a changing profile also? Because many of these settlements are no more only residential. They are commercial also, they are industrial also. There is a huge change of use. There is huge change in occupants also profile. There are rentals also. People are coming here for rentals, and it's a good market for rentals now. I'm not saying it's bad, but what I'm saying is, how do you anticipate this growth? Where will it stop? And then we need to ask the question of livability. How do we ensure livability in the longer run? Even if you provide services today in Sangam Vihar, how do you expect it to grow in next 10 years or 15 years? And will you be able to cater for it? Will you be able to take the pipe network? Will it be able to take that load? Now, this is a question which we need to ask, that these have been growing in an uncontrolled manner. So this is one very important issue I would like to put in terms of sustainability and provision of services, and nobody seems to be talking about it. Because even after regularization, it's only the legally you're called regularized. Otherwise, there is no control. You can make it 4-storied, 5-storied, whatever you can do. It's uncontrolled license to do whatever you like. So I'm surprised that, the way we have studied unauthorized colony, say 10 years ago, and we studied it now, the same colony. You see redevelopment taking place. Flats are being constructed in unauthorized colonies. So the entire flavor of things are changing, and we don't know what it will lead to. So this is a very important challenge that we have to think, that will you allow this to continue, or who are we to allow? It's growing. Nobody's asking anybody's permission. It's happening. So this is a challenge. And what is the cost of livability? what would it mean in terms of people's safety, security, and health? So this is an important question I would like to pose. Then second very important thing which came up in the morning was hoarding of space, which is very important in Delhi, because the way property prices are increasing, I think everybody's learning to hoard space. Everybody's trying to hoard space. Everybody's become sensitive, not only the rich, but everybody who can manage. I'll just tell you one small example. My driver, he was, used to buy fruits and crates from the sabji mandi. And I was wondering, how can he afford and I can't afford? And he would say, I have 6 plots in unauthorized colonies. I'll sell each one of them and make enough money so that I can marry off my daughters and please live a very, very good life. So there's a huge speculation which is going on. So please don't misunderstand me that, I'm trying to give the negative side of it. But imagine 50% of the colonies which are, to be regularized are only 50% built, less than 50% built. There are vacant plots lying all around. So I don't know who are these people who have these vacant plots in these unauthorized colonies. And I think there are people who are speculating on land. And these plots get filled up, and there are a huge number of absentee landlords. So anybody and everybody who has some surplus money would go and buy 1 or 2 plots. When I did survey, they also offered me, madam, aaj khareed lo, kal ko acha aa jayega. But I didn't have that kind of money to really invest in. But it really is making good money. And in some of the older unauthorized colonies, it's not affordable even for us to be able to stay there. So speculation and market forces are operating not only on the rich, but also on the middle class, also on informal developments, also in resettlement colonies. Some of the surveys and studies have shown that the resettlement plot owners are putting juggies in open spaces and giving it on rent. So this is also a trend. So how do you cater for services to this kind of thing? And then another very important thing which I would like to bring about is that once, even if you improve certain colony, but after some time the population doubles. So the services again become deficient. And so this deficiency continues and continues. Because the more you provide services, more attractive it becomes for newcomers to come and build houses. The plots get subdivided, the flats are getting built, and this is a kind of unstoppable process. Now, as a result of which, what is happening, there's always a deficiency of services. Now, what is the impact of this is that, especially in squatter settlements, Juggi Jhoppadis, what you find that in last few years, last decade, there have been large number of evictions which are ordered as a response to the PIL, public interest litigations, which were put by the surrounding colony owners. The surrounding, there's a conflict which is happening between these unplanned developments and the planned developments, because they find that these people are getting everything free. Not that they're getting everything free, but you must understand the courts have entertained these PILs on the issue of environmental law. Environmental law, that these are a nuisance to public health and are dangerous for public health, and that's why these PILs have been admitted and courts have given eviction orders. So can you imagine that lack of services can lead to evictions? Because there is a hostility between people who have services. There's also other side. I remember I've read a court case where when Barka was being constructed, so they were denied water supply by the public agency. No reflections on any particular, but this is a court case, so it's a fact. It can be, it's recorded. But unauthorized colonies were given because MCD refused to give water supply to a planned development. This is, no, we will give it to unauthorized colonies. So when the taxpayers are paying for a planned development, they don't get water supply. But the unauthorized colonies, because it's a political patronage, and which has become, the 75% of the electorate, which is being, used by the politicians as a captive and wanting, population and electorate, that is creating havoc. So it's not that, people are not wise in the place, policymakers, but who listens to them? As rightly pointed out by our chief guest today, that, sometimes policy declarations wait for the elections. So there is a decision making. Everybody knows that this needs to be done, but you will not be allowed to do it till the elections come. Everything is postponed for that matter. So there is a policy paralysis. I can say this openly because I've studied, I can tell you many examples of this, many examples. But there's a policy paralysis as to whether people really want to do and improve things. Because the moment they improve the life of the people, this nexus will be broken. This dependency on political channels of dependence on the politicians for getting basic services will be broken. And I think nobody actually wants in the heart of their hearts. So therefore, improvement is that there's something to be preached and something to be practiced. So you can always arm twist these people that, okay, this election will give you this, next election will give you this, and this continues. This continues even in unauthorized colonies. And then there is an issue, I think, very rightly raised by one of the lady in the last session, was that are we looking at a very micro level issue? For example, the issue of drainage that she raised. I was involved in preparing a regularization plan for one of the unauthorized colonies. And I saw that, the drainage has to have an outflow. And that outflow has to connect to the outside, the settlement. But they said, no, you don't have to think about what is happening outside. You just look at within this. And then I prepared a plan of about 22 colonies, a cluster plan. I said, no, these are all integrated. They need to be integrated in terms of water supply, sewerage, in terms of circulation, in terms of electricity. The services are not, like disconnected from one settlement to other. But they said, no, government has decided that there is no policy. इंडिविजुअल का करना है तो इंडिविजुअल का करना है. तो अब एक कॉलोनी को आप कर लीजिए, वहाँ पे 25 कॉलोनियाँ लगी हुई हैं साथ में, उसका कैसे वाटर सप्लाई प्लान होगा, गॉड अलोन नोस. सो दिस इज, नोबडी वांट्स टू रियली हैव अ होलिस्टिक व्यू. किसी तरह से फिक्स अप द प्रॉब्लम फॉर नाउ सो दैट पीपल कीप क्वाइट फॉर नाउ. सो आई एम रियली a bit disappointed with having worked here for such a long time. So these were some of the issues that I had. But then there is also some issue of obsession with resettlement. Delhi has an obsession with resettlement. I don't know why. It's not, if you see the three-pronged policy of the slum department, it also talks of in-situ regularization. But it has never been done. They always start with the wrong thing. Because some important policymaker likes resettlement. He wants clean Delhi. So who cares about technical opinion or whatever? Then lastly, one more issue, governance, I think. Look at some of the agencies which are directly dealing with this. They didn't have a head of the department for 2 years. How do you expect that organization to work and take decisions? There are constant changes. I mean, especially, I must say, in administration, if there are transfers, every 6 months, every 8 months, by the time the CEO comes and settle down and begin to understand the problem, I think it's time for go. And then, especially in the slum department, they are so bothered. I'm sorry to say, they're so bothered with every local politician telephoning that they would like to leave as early as possible. It's not a very, very comfortable, and they don't have any freedom to take decisions which are appropriate, which are in the interest of the city. And lastly, where is the issue of sustainable policy? Because every time the government will change, they'll bring something new. Now you have all that work which was done for Rajiv Awas Yojana is dumped aside. Now you have affordable housing for all. Then there'll be another policy after 3 years. Then there'll be another policy for... So we go 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. So I don't know, where are we progressing? These are some of the issues. I hope they are not too academic. They are, I think, what I have gathered from, not from any books, but actually seeing and watching Delhi for last couple of decades. Thank you very much.